So the second most important principle is learning that trauma is emotions and energy that you have either suppressed or avoided from the past that's now stuck inside your body and fueling anxiety. This principle is important because it demystifies trauma anxiety. Everyone carries trauma to various degrees. Trauma is a fact of life, but it's not meant to be a life sentence. Your body is designed to store and heal trauma. However, healing trauma first requires understanding. So this principle is recognizing that a lot of the anxiety you're experiencing is going to be fueling or being fueled from emotions and energy that's stuck inside your body. That's what fuels anxiety. If you understand this principle, it makes it a lot easier to heal going forwards. So trauma equals suppressed emotions and energy. Trauma isn't just the obvious experiences such as war or abuse. It's anything that exceeds your nervous system capacity and causes you to suppress and contain the energy or emotions of what you are experiencing in that moment. When something overwhelms your nervous system capacity to feel safe to feel through it, your body suppresses and contains the energy and emotions inside your body until you are safer or you have the resources and support to feel through it. In an ideal world, we would experience life, feel safe enough to feel through the emotions, and then express it either on our own or to someone else, thus releasing it. Your emotions are energy in motion. It's meant to move through you. Any emotions we don't feel safe to experience and express trigger the nervous system to either resist, avoid, or suppress the emotion. It's kind of like having a tank of each unexpressed emotion inside. The emotional energy then builds up inside us like a volcano waiting to erupt. Then, when an emotion gets triggered, instead of feeling just that moment's emotion, we feel our whole life's worth of that suppressed emotion. We go from 0 to 100, similar to when you experience panic attacks. The main emotions that fuel anxiety are vulnerable emotions like sadness, scared and anxious, anger, guilt, and shame. They're the core emotions that we typically resist, avoid, or suppress. When we do that, it builds up inside us. So this is why, that nice person who's never angry, that never allows themselves to experience any anger, sometimes eventually loses their shit and completely blows up. And then when they do, they get embarrassed, and that sparks a shame spiral, which then, drives them further into this response of avoiding their feelings. But we want to have access to it. It's your emotions that fuel your anxious thoughts, and you have to feel to heal. If you avoid or disconnect from your feelings, your body has to speak to you through your thoughts, which is why we experience anxious thoughts. Your body wants to heal. So essentially, your body's saying to you, hey, look, we need to address these feelings. And it's trying to trigger these feelings inside you. That's why it's getting you to think about sometimes these stupidly random scenarios, because it's not about the scenario, it's about the feelings and emotions that scenario may trigger, because it's those feelings are sitting inside you and it wants to be triggered. Now, everyone has trauma. Let's just read this quote by Peter Levine. What's going on? Trauma has become so commonplace that most people don't even recognize its presence. It affects everyone. Each of us has had a traumatic experience at some point in our lives, regardless of whether it left us with an obvious case of post-traumatic stress. Because trauma symptoms can remain hidden for years after a triggering event, some of us who have been traumatized are not yet symptomatic. So nobody escapes childhood unscathed. We all experience overwhelming sensations or we experience overwhelming feelings. It's super, super common. Doesn't mean that we all experience symptoms. There's a vast, vast degree of it. So if I asked people if they had ever experienced trauma, I'm sure many would say no. However, if I asked, have you ever felt overwhelmed or unable to be present with what you're feeling, everyone would say yes. Now, what a 4-year-old may find overwhelming might not bother you as an adult. I remember my first day at nursery and crying for hours as my mum left me. My adult self can look back and understand that I was completely okay and that nothing happened, and I may be dismissive looking back. However, as a 4-year-old, being away from my mum, perhaps for the first time, and left with strangers that I'd never met or knew, if they were safe, could easily overwhelm my little nervous system at the time. Now, trauma isn't about what happened, but what didn't happen after. So using my nursery example, my safety left me. I feel unsafe, and so my nervous system goes into the yellow zone or sympathetic activation. I go into a lesser known survival mode of attach and cry and attempt to achieve safety for another. If someone then co-regulates with me and soothes me through their nervous system being in the green zone, I then join them in the green zone of safe connection and release the energy. If no one is able to co-regulate with me, I may remain in a dysregulated state of sympathetic activation, so I'll be continuing to cry, or if I hit my capacity to be with the activation, my body may suppress and contain the energy inside me, and I might go quiet and distant in a red zone. So this is often what happens. Just a quick note that doctors still tell mothers to sleep train the baby. Don't pick the baby up when it's sort of crying if it doesn't need food or changing. But often the babies will cry because it just needs connection. It doesn't feel safe being isolated on its own. And eventually what happens is that it does work because eventually the babies will just kind of completely disconnect and contain, and that's when they'll go quiet. So if my mother has a safe nervous system that can co-regulate with me, I may come out of red into yellow, cry, and then back into green and release the energy. And this may happen straight away in the days, weeks following. So, for example, if I went home after and I contained and I shut down and I didn't feel safe to release it in that moment, when I got back to my mother, if she was able to co-regulate with me, I may go back through the stages. I may come out of red into the state of activation, cry the energy out, release it, and then back into connection myself. Again, this can happen either straight away or in the days or weeks following. If enough safety isn't available, either from myself or from others, the energy and emotions will remain in my body, suppressed and contained, waiting to be triggered in the future. Perhaps my adult relationships causing me to always seek reassurance or get anxious away from my loved ones. This is an example of how a seemingly non-event can still become a trauma. Now, many times I've worked with clients and they've gone back to childhood experiences that were the root of their trigger or their pattern. And it was something that adult self wouldn't describe as traumatic, however, it still had an effect on them. So, many times I've had clients go back to, a 4-year-old experience in the playground when, their best friend said, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. And it was painful for them in that moment. Again, it's less about the experience, but how the experience affects your nervous system and then the lack of co-regulation and return to connection after in order for it to be released. So trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. That's what that holding space and co-regulation means. It means that someone is going to be a compassionate witness to your pain. They're basically being with you with that pain or the emotions in connection. And that's what makes your body feel safe to be with it too. Trauma doesn't happen because of the event, but from a lack of return to the green zone of safe connection after. From the big single event experiences that you would typically define as traumatic, you're unlikely to process in the moment because you're focused on survival. And we can only release energy and emotions when we feel safe to do so. It's not until after the experience, when you're safe, that you can process the experience either by being able to self-regulate and hold space for yourself to release the energy or through co-regulation with another. 100 people can experience the same traumatic event and only some of them end up with PTSD. Those that end up with PTSD are the ones that were unable to return back to the green zone after and release the survival energy and aftershock of trauma due to a dysregulated nervous system and or from a lack of support and safe connections around them to co-regulate with and release the energy. Without sufficient nervous system and emotional safety to process the energy and emotions, the body will suppress and contain the energy and emotions in the body and store it as trauma. Again, a lot to unpack. Feel free to pause and go back through these things, but just understand that if you can understand that trauma is very, very normal. We contain. So another example of this that's very normal is, say, for example, if you're having conflict with your partner or even with a friend, you may kind of shut down and unable to actually release the emotions, and you don't want to connect with them. And then only after, when you've kind of lowered your defenses, you're no longer shouting at each other, then you're able to actually access the emotions underneath it. It's a similar kind of concept. So trauma isn't about what happened, but what happens inside of you as a result of what happened. Trauma is what creates the automatic subconscious responses that you don't choose, such as your triggers. A trigger is a stimulus that triggers your nervous system into either the yellow zone of activation or the red zone of shutdown and containment. Now, you can have this to various degrees. So for activation could be a small heart rate spike. So you could think about something in your heart rate just rises gently versus an intense flashback. Examples of shutdown could be, on a low end of the scale, could be not speaking up. So, for example, in a situation of conflict, sometimes it may be difficult to express or voice your concerns or to voice how you truly feel about it. That could be an example of a shutdown or containment. Versus the extreme end is when you experience, say, dissociation. You're completely disconnected from your body or from reality. If you've ever experienced that, it can be very, very overwhelming, but that would be an extreme form of your nervous system being in the red zone. It can also trigger automatic behaviors. So survival responses such as fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or attach and avoidance. The survival responses such as fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and attach, which we'll go through in the next the lesson. It can also cause behaviors such as avoidance behaviors, addictions, self-sabotage, and things like that. So if you ever do any behaviors that you think, why do I do that? Or, it doesn't make any sense to you. The reason why is because it's an automatic response, an automatic behavior that's probably been created in response to, experiences you've experienced. It also shapes your automatic beliefs. So negative beliefs about yourself, the world, or others, and this shapes your inner and outer reality. So how you go about your life is based on your beliefs. Your experiences, so it can be, negative experience that you've had, will shape your beliefs and how you're operating in your reality. For example, if I perhaps if I got cheated on, I may not trust anyone in relationships. I may not feel like I'm good enough, and in that way, I'm never, going for things that I feel like I deserve. I may, never feel like I'm worthy of receiving love, and I may accept poor relationships. Um, Understanding all of this again, I'm just trying to just gently kind of dip your toe into this area if you don't understand it, but hopefully this kind of understands or explains things a little bit more clearly. Now, every automatic reaction, behavior, or belief that you don't like or choose to is being fueled by the energy and emotions stuck inside your body as a result from trauma. The good news is that you can learn how to safely release the energy and emotions, and when you do, the triggers, behaviors, and beliefs will stop, giving you back control and setting you free. And I'm going to teach you how. So, if you have any questions about, again, this can be very heavy sort of information sometimes, feel free to go over this again if you need to. But if you have any questions, please ask in the community, and I'll be more than happy to help.